Good afternoon, and thank you for your kind introduction. But I hope that the presentations on regulatory issues are rather boring often. But I hope that you can find some elements that can help you to understand better what we do, and also how we can cooperate with you as academics and scientists in improving the situation of adult vaccination. Now, the EMA has a legal mandate, like all regulatory agencies. Our actions are enshrined in law. So first of all, we have the mandate to authorize vaccines in Europe. The second one is to look at the risk management of vaccines. So once a vaccine is authorized, is it performing in terms of safety and efficacy as it is intended? And this includes collection of data post-authorization. In this collection of data, we also now have, with the pharmacovigilance legislation, the possibility to impose onto companies studies both for safety and efficacy. They're called PASS and PIAS studies. So these are a legal obligation on companies to be performed. And we also can evaluate the design of the studies to make sure that they would perform with that design the purpose for which they were requested from the companies. Now, if something goes wrong, there are some regulatory actions that we can take, which are a variation to the marketing authorization. This is the most likely outcome. A suspension of the marketing authorization, and the revocation, so it means the marketing authorization is taken away. Now, to be fairly honest, the situation has to be really dire to end up with a suspension or revocation. It has happened with a number of drugs, to my knowledge, never on a vaccine. And then we have also a commitment to transparency by publishing all of the requirements for post-authorization measures and the basis for approval of drugs. We also have expert groups, and here as well the cooperation with academics and the learned society comes into play. There is the Vaccine Working Party and scientific expert groups on vaccines, and both of them give scientific input to the CHMP, the Committee for Human Medicinal Products, which is the main committee of the EMA. Now, this is all very nice, but in practice, what does it mean? And I think that the job of a good regulator is to ask the right questions, looking at the data that we have, and to provide support to find the right answers. Because assumptions leave us with an evidence bias, right, rather than an evidence-based decision. So what population will use the vaccine? Are we looking at the epidemiology of who is going to be vaccinated or who will potentially benefit from a vaccination? And then is the benefit risk that we conclude on supported for that population? Now, are we missing something? Are there knowledge gaps? And how can we address those? And are there areas of unmet medical need? So this goes back to the first question. Is there a population that will benefit from the vaccination that currently is neglected? So to address the knowledge gap, first of all, I'm reporting here what I would like ideally to see for every vaccine. This was a Prevenar 13 EPAR, which is the European Public Assessment Report, which gives the grounds for approval of a drug. This is publicly available on our website. And this trial was also conducted in accordance with the scientific advice, which is the advice we give on the design of a trial so that it helps us to understand what we want to see. And this was to extend the vaccination age to adults aged 50 plus. So here, we're putting clearly that the trial included patients who had an increased risk of pneumococcal disease, such as chronic cardiovascular disease, chronic pulmonary disease, including asthma, renal disorders, diabetes, liver disease, and blah, blah. So this really, I think, is meant to explain what type of population did we enroll. Are these patients at risk, or are the patients who are healthy older people? So this is, first of all, a commitment to encourage the enrollment of patients that are at risk, and also to be clear about the evidence we had. The other is also to address a gap, is to provide appropriate scientific guidance. So for example, in 2016, there was a revision of the influenza guideline, and some points in this guideline are very relevant to the older population. First of all, for adult and elderly population, you should specifically demonstrate non-inferior immunogenicity of the vaccine, because we know that the immune system would react differently in an aging person. Then, if you have an adjuvanted vaccine, you need to justify a superior immunogenicity versus a non-adjuvanted vaccine. And that's one of the requirements. To address the immunosenescence aspects, we need an evaluation of cellular-mediated immunity for the elderly rather than antibody titers only. And then we need to make every effort to enroll a population representative, stressing as well that above 75 years of age is important. Now, the influenza vaccines are mostly old dossiers where the only update yearly is given by the strains of influenza that come. So I have to say that for the older dossiers, we don't have a huge number of older peoples, and I'll be speaking later on what other measures we're taking to address that. So the third point on addressing the knowledge gaps is what is called the risk management plan. The risk management plan is part of every approval of a drug, and it starts with a safety specification. The safety specification illustrates what is known about a drug and what is not known. So the characteristic of the drugs in terms of pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, and so on, expected interactions, the target population that who was studied and who was not studied, given the population we expect to use, and the nature of the disease. So this leads to a list of what are called important identified risks, important potential risks, and missing information. So we go to the next steps, which are the safety concerns. So to identify and characterize what the safety concerns are. And the pharmacovigilance plan has some routine activities and some additional activities that are this type of studies I was mentioning earlier, so some targeted studies. In this case, for example, it could be interesting to understand how frailer adults are performing, and that's why also we are working on a guidance to stratify patients not on the basis of age, but of their frailty status. The last point of the safety concern is the risk minimization measures, which are the measures that are intended to prevent or minimize the risk to patients. There is a specific guideline that, on good pharmacovigilance practice, the GVP, for vaccines as well, and we're working on one specifically for the elderly to look at how additional actions can be made to minimize any risks that have been identified. So, an example, as I was saying, for the vaccine of influenza is that we are looking at effectiveness studies. So we want to monitor the effectiveness of the vaccine due to the change in the vaccine composition. And this is meant to generate brand-specific data for the various types of vaccines. And these studies are currently included in the risk management plan because this is part of the legal framework and makes them more enforceable. But the point is that we need to collect results from different seasons before any conclusion can be drawn in terms of having, both a longer term and a sufficient data. So again, we may consider regulatory action if a specific concern is identified. So this is sort of just starting, but it's something that we considered important. The fourth point on addressing the knowledge gaps is to define what unmet needs there are in the EU. We have heard the WHO has, of course, an important focus on some diseases worldwide, particularly in developing countries. But in Europe, the immunosenescence, the nosocomial infection, pneumococcal disease, and herpes zoster are some of the topics that keep popping out. Don't be offended if your topic is not there, but this is sort of the ones that my colleagues who work in the vaccines area have flagged up as the ones that they have their eyes on. So we're developing a new guidelines. So for respiratory syncytial virus, there was a guideline in 2016. We have set up a cluster with the FDA and Health Canada on Clostridium. We monitor, as I mentioned, the results of epidemiological studies, and we're trying to build connections with industry and academia in platforms that are financed by the European Commission. For example, there is one about biomarkers for vaccination, which is called BioVacSafe. There is a website on this initiative. Other issues that are emerging is the catch-up vaccination of migrants who may have come from countries who did not have childhood vaccinations or where the history of their childhood vaccination is patchy. And of course, as migration is increasingly important, this influences the herd immunity in Europe. And we are planning a workshop in the fourth quarter of 2017 with regulators, the recommending body for the vaccination who give the schedules, and companies to define and discuss which unmet needs there are. So collaboration is important in terms of identifying the needs, in terms of for us to understand if any recommendations that we make could be more usefully implemented by how things work actually in clinical practice. And so it is we are really quite open to discuss with a number of stakeholders. So first of all, we need studies at the EU level, both for safety, efficacy, effectiveness, and to confirm the benefit risk of the vaccines in the population that will use them. There is a key role of the public health authority in the collection of data. On the other hand, we must also be mindful of the need of this data versus the cost of collecting this data and the reliability. So these are areas very fast evolving, and not only in the area of vaccine, we're really keeping an eye on how we can better use healthcare data. There is a clear different role or responsibility according to the different stakeholders, because in the end, the vaccination recommendations are still at a national level, but we're really striving to try to make a consolidated and uniform approach if it's possible. The funding models of this as well, there are platforms which are publicly funded, some are mixed funding with industry, are an important source for the research in this sense. So we are very, very committed, both on a technical and on a scientific and governance level, to improving the knowledge on the vaccines, and particularly if there are valid suggestions. My colleagues in the vaccine area are very open to discuss those, both in terms of target diseases, biomarker, improvement of reporting practices, to fulfill the objectives of knowing what in reality the vaccine does and whether it is safe and effective, and whether we are investing in vaccinations that will work for what we expect. So thank you very much.
When there is one adverse event in one country, so you have one event, adverse event, not known, a second, a third, you have to investigate this kind of adverse event, but very often the press is already saying that the vaccine is not safe, etc., etc. How you can act to stop this false information?
Yes, that is true, and we have seen it sadly with a number of vaccines, the HPV vaccine, with the MMR vaccine. Now the EMA has a sort of heavy machinery, because we routinely get this information in, and it is routinely analyzed for signals that emerge from the reportings. The point is that it takes a certain time that perhaps I would agree is a bit slow in terms of responding to those concerns, and then to assess the data, to call in the companies, because we have to offer the companies who are concerned the possibility to justify this finding or to explain them. So the process is long, and of course it is much more sexy to come up with news that may hamper the whole process. And it is very hard to dispel those things. I cannot offer an easy answer, because we really try to stick to a proper scientific process, and we would not come up with an announcement on conclusions before those conclusions are reached and fully discussed. So that's a problem.
Yeah, probably the interaction with the scientific societies, as we are making a major effort, would also help in this regard toward the...
Claudio Franceschi, Bologna, Italy. I didn't see, maybe I'm wrong, among the topics that the agency is interested in, the problem of responder and non-responder. Is something that you are looking at, or is not a topic that you are interested in?
Are you meaning, for example, for influenza, the response may be not in, maybe more a cellular-mediated response rather than an antibody response, or I mean, we, you know, as for every drug, there will be a percentage of people who do not respond to a treatment. So I'm not sure I am fully aware. Yeah.
Important topic, especially in the elderly.
Yes.
The percentage of non-responders can be very high. So,
Yeah.
and
So-
of course, it depends on the type of vaccine.
Yeah, it depends on the type of vaccine. That's why certain vaccines we are encouraging specific studies if we think that there may be a difference in how the elderly respond. And the second is the effectiveness studies, so to look at also cases that emerge after a vaccination campaign and looking how basically if the vaccine is performing as expected. The other point is as well that these studies are rather expensive and very large, and it is a problem, in particular in presence of herd immunity, for example, to develop a new vaccine. For pneumococcal vaccines, basically we try to look at, is it possible to look at the cases who emerge rather than making a clinical trial that would be impossibly large.
No, but I mean, you do not have any database about this topic.
No, not specifically.